Good evening, everyone. I'm going to raise a glass to James Patterson, who tonight we are talking about two new Patterson books, the 28th Alex Cross called Deadly Cross, and the true crime book, The Last Days of John Lennon. And I want to welcome Lee Child, who has come to join us. I wrote to him a while back and said he was the only person I knew that could really talk to Jim Patterson about John Lennon and Alex Cross. So happily, he agreed. I don't think I need to do a long introduction for either author, but I did want to mention, in addition to his prolific books, that Jim has been a champion of education and literacy. In addition to his Edgar Award and 9 Emmy Awards, he received the 2019 National Humanities Medal, and the National Book Foundation presented him with a Literarian Award for outstanding service to the American literary community. So, Jim, you have truly given back to everybody, and I salute you.
Yahoo.
I just want to jump in real quick, everybody that's watching on Facebook, and say that I'll be largely invisible here, but I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in. So don't hesitate to send in the questions using the comments function. And then about, I don't know, half an hour or 45 minutes in, we'll get to some of the questions. So thank you.
Perfect.
And I would like to say that Jim has kindly signed, or at least I think he has, because they're not here yet, a letter that we will insert into each copy of Deadly Cross and The Last Days of John Lennon. And Jim, I thought of it because when Bill Clinton wrote his autobiography or memoir, whatever it was, one of the author I know gave him a copy from the Poison Pen, and he wrote me a really nice thank you letter, which I put in the book, and I understand that makes it worth dramatically more than if he hadn't. So you've written, I thought, what a great idea. But I did want to ask you before I turned over to Lee, did I hear that you may be writing a sequel to your collaboration?
Oh, it's done. Yeah, it's coming out in June. Lee's going on tour with us again.
How wonderful. All right. So
Lee actually went, what do we do, Philly?
Philly, yeah.
Yeah, it was Philly, yeah. He was a great moderator, too. That's a hard job, the moderator job.
It was a pretty hard job with you two, I'll tell you.
So I should also just mention that Lee, a braver man than I, or perhaps many, has actually authorized a biography of himself while he's still alive called The Reacher Guide, which I think is fabulous, written by Heather Martin, a British scholar and fan. And with his brother Andrew, has this year published his 25th Jack Reacher novel called The Sentinel. And fortunately, we have both those books in stock too. So with that, gentlemen, I'm just going to take quietly aside and let you go.
Here's to the Sentinel, yeah.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And it's great to be with you. It's great to see James Patterson. I wish we were doing it in person. I would buy you dinner afterward to say thank you for your many kindnesses, not just to me, but to the community in general. 2 books. Initially, I thought, what? Only 2 books? Finally, I get the chance to interview James Patterson, and we only have 2 books to talk about. What's wrong with the guy, slacker? But what 2 books? First, we got the new Alex Cross, which is huge for me. I mean, one of the enduring series protagonists of all time. And we'll get into the specific book, but also the theory of what makes a great series character and what keeps him appealing year to year. And the Last Days of John Lennon, which is, let's start talking about that, because that was somewhat unexpected, but also somewhat expected from you, because we've never talked about it face to face, but I've seen interview snippets from you that suggest you are deeply into the pop and rock music of the era. Did I hear you once say, somebody asked, what's your favorite album? Was it you who said Led Zeppelin 2, Why We Were Born with Ears?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah, I don't know if it's still my favorite, but it's right up there. Yeah, I love it. I was an usher at the Fillmore East. I don't know if people know that there was a Fillmore East and a Fillmore West. Bill Graham, and so I saw Hendrix and the Doors and Jefferson Airplane. All those. I think I saw them. I was a little, but it was the There was that period. And then like a lot of people in my generation who claim they were, well, I was actually at Woodstock.
All right.
So that was a treat as well.
Yeah, the crowd.
And so rock and roll is a big deal for me. I love it, and the Lennon thing. There's so many connections I have with his situation. One of the weirdest ones is where my house is in Florida. It's connected by a bridge to the house that John and Yoko owned here. And they were going to settle, well, at least for part of the year that he was murdered. The year he was murdered, I was living on Central Park West, 9 blocks from the Dakota. And when I heard about it, I went up there that night, and there were already 100 and some people there. And we've had this whole period of JFK's assassination and Robert and Martin Luther King, et cetera, et cetera. So here was just one more terrible assassination in this country. And I went up there the next morning as well. And there were hundreds of people outside of the Dakota is a weird building anyway. That's where they shot Rosemary's Baby. So it was a spooky, sad, crazy environment. And, I held all that with me. And eventually I decided I wanted to write about Lennon.
Did you follow the Beatles from the beginning, from Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, no, I remember I was in high school, and I was on my way to school. I had 4 other kids in this old Rambler, terrible old car, and which they stopped manufacturing. It was a good idea to stop it. And the DJ came on, New York City DJ, and he said, "There's this band that's really making it big in London, and I don't think they're going to make it here. But here's 2 songs," and he played "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and "She Loves You." And he said, and we're in the car going like, I don't know, sounds good to us. And by the end of the week, in those days, they had the 45 single on each side. And I Want to Hold Your Hand was #1 and "She Loves You" was #2. And it was, and then the Ed Sullivan Show. And, so all of that was a big part of my growing up period.
Yeah, me too. And it was... literally saved my life in a way, because growing up in Britain was so dull, post-war Britain. You had the sense that something magnificent had been achieved some years before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
World War II had been won. It was such a physical and emotional thunderclap that the whole country was exhausted. It was gray and boring. And worst of all, for us young people, the sense was that history was over. The good stuff was just behind us.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing ahead. And you can't really dispute that, I think, historically at that time. But it was awful for kids, because it was like, it's over. There's nothing for you. And I first heard the Beatles in 1963, "She Loves You." Mm-hmm. And even now, that opening drums from Ringo, 11 seconds long it is, it just gives me goose pimples. It utterly changed my life in 2.5 minutes.
Well, there were so many good, and they all knew each other. Cream and the Stones and Traffic, and they, and they were aware of the Yardbirds, et cetera, et cetera. T-Rex, that was probably a little later.
Yeah. Did you do the Phil Maurice for Cream?
The what?
Were you at the Cream show at Phil Maurice?
No.
Otherwise you might have met my future wife. She went to see Cream at Phil Maurice.
I didn't want to talk about it, but we did meet,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, no, I didn't see them. Unfortunately. And I love that. Well, and I love Stevie Winwood. Was he with Cream? He was a Cream, yeah. And then Blind Faith, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know all this stuff, Barbara. This was before your time, but
No, it's actually after my time. That's why I'm cracked up. I was thinking about when I was in the time that you're talking about in my life, I was down at the Blue Note listening to Errol Garner and Duke.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They had a pop section for high school students. So we couldn't, Illinois had these weird laws. So anyway, we couldn't drink, but they roped off a thing. And so we would go down there and listen to all the jazz.
Couldn't drink is the best reason to drink. Didn't you know that?
No.
That's like a party sign.
Right. So for me, the big moment was when Elvis Presley hit the Ed Sullivan Show. I was able to watch that one live. Again, I'm senior to both of you. So I'm going to fade myself away here and just let the two of you be on the screen here for a while, since I'm accomplishing nothing. Carry on.
So the book is written, structured exactly like a thriller, with two paths that historically we know are going to meet. So that was my first question. This is a bit like The Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth, because historically we know what's going to happen because it's a fact.
Sure.
But it is still incredibly tense and thriller-like getting there. So was that just muscle memory to write it like a thriller, or was that a deliberate decision?
That part of it is muscle memory, but I wanted to, as I got into it, and the first draft was more thriller. It was more going back and forth between Chapman and I just didn't find Chapman all that interesting, honestly. And that's where I started. I decided I wanted to talk a lot about the Beatles and lay that out. And it's funny, people, we know the story, but a lot of younger people, when I say younger, I mean under 40, under 50, don't know the story. I did a book recently on Cassius Clay when he was a kid in Louisville with a kid's book. And this teacher from Michigan wrote in, he loved the book, and he said that they discussed the book in his class, 26 kids, none of them knew who Muhammad Ali was.
Really?
And so, yeah, here you have most people, a lot of people who are going to read this book, they really don't know the story. They know a lot of the songs, the Beatles songs, but they don't know the Beatles. They don't know the story. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to do the crime story. And I also wanted to touch on this love story between John and Yoko, which at the time, you know, most people didn't like it. It wasn't their, that's not the way they saw John going. But it wound up being, I mean, there was a rough spot, but it wound up being a beautiful love story.
Yeah, I really appreciated that, because she gets such a bad press.
Yeah.
Because it's assumed that somehow she broke up the Beatles.
They fit each other. They had artistic temperaments, and it really was a wonderful. And the other thing that I liked about it, what made the story even more tragic to me, was as he got older. Yeah, remember he got famous. He was a baby. I mean, he was a little kid, you know. And suddenly the most famous, for one of the most famous people in the world, and people, you know, I mean, you know a little bit, and we know a tiny bit, but multiply what we know times 1,000. And as he got older, I think he became a much more grounded, rounded human being. He became a good father. He became a good husband, and he had just recorded the Double Fantasy album. It was his first in 5 years, and right after that is when he got killed. So you know, I don't know. To me that made it a much sadder event.
Yeah, especially, and the other thing that comes out very obviously is how brief the Beatles were.
Yeah, 7 years.
They had, from the very first gig in Hamburg to breaking up, was 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, just the blink of an eye, but what a 10 years it was. They delivered us from one place to another place.
And a couple of hundred songs. I mean, I was talking to one of the radio guys today, and he was talking about, he had met, I don't know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, one of those guys. And he said, the guy said, we had like 5 songs that people know. The Beatles got like 200 songs that people know. Ringo used to talk about that virtually every other day, one of them would come in and I got a new song. You know?
Yeah. And they were short. It's so succinct as well. You pointed out that Ticket to Ride is their first single that went over 3 minutes, and that amazed me. Actually, I thought, yeah, that's
now that you mention it, yeah.
How extraordinary, really.
Yeah, they got into longer stuff in the middle there, like with Sgt. Pepper's, that whole, you know.
Yeah, sure. Which was, I mean, I have a personal theory that they should have broken up after Sgt. Pepper. I think that the Day in the Life is just such a great song, and the piano chord at the end of it was so elegiac that, and they had done what they set out to do. They had changed the world by that point.
Yeah, no, I love what I loved about that, and I think it's what I love about your books, is you don't know where it's going. You don't know. It's like, oh, what a surprise, and a good surprise. And then you had various groups try to sort of imitate that, Pink Floyd and the Who and whatever, and the rock operas, and which is fine. I mean, to try those things, but they did it, and they did it well, and they were produced really well. But one of the fascinating things about them, in the beginning when they started, none of them wrote, none of them wrote music. None of them could read music, which is stunning.
It is. I mean, it was all by ear, which I guess is true of a lot of the jazz guys as well.
Yeah.
But to be able to do it as well as they did with absolutely no formal background.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, they were really the first band to write their own stuff. They were not just interpreters.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's just that I forget, because I've been doing it since 8 this morning. Did I mention the thing about living on Central Park West?
Yeah.
I did. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
What building was that?
It's one of those things you go, did I do that? Did I do that already this time?
Tell me what building it is, because in New York, I live on Central Park West as well, so I know.
25, corner, it's the Century.
Okay. Yeah, really nice
between
building.
62nd and 63rd, yeah.
Yeah. And it was, so you're south, I'm north, I'm at 86th Street. So
yeah, and that's when I went up to Dakota that night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so John Lennon is, I mean, obviously he got killed, do you, but apart from that, do you think he was the most significant Beatle?
Well, I'm frank. I don't know if you ever run into the photographer, Harry Benson. He was sort of their unofficial. He came over from England with them. I think he's from Scotland originally. And he's become a friend of mine down here. And he knew them all. He liked them all. But he said John was his favorite. He said John was deeper. And John was the one who wanted, especially toward the end of the Beatles, he just wanted the stuff to, like, well, let's see if we can affect Vietnam, or let's see if we can affect all this violence in this country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's an interesting side of John as well. And it certainly came out in terms of his solo stuff. He's just trying to,
I mean, I think Paul is the better musician.
Yeah.
In the Beatles.
And George was probably a better musician too.
Yeah, although I think that I was always a bit down on George. I thought he didn't play that great, but the problem with Paul was, and certainly still is, that, as you said before, these were 20-year-olds who suddenly became the most famous humans on the planet.
Yeah.
And Paul's reaction was to become kind of guarded. And I've met him once or twice at various charity things, and it's impossible to have a conversation with him, because he's just so aware that anything he says might be reported. Come back to bite him in the ass. He actually comes across very bland in public. Whereas I never met Lennon, but I imagine he would have been a lot more engaging and a lot more fun at the time.
Ringo probably be the most fun of all.
Yeah, probably. I mean, and that's another thing you bring out, the soap opera aspect of the Beatles. Yeah. It was shared responsibility. And there were a whole bunch of people who loved Ringo who didn't particularly care for the others. And the same in turn. And so the soap opera really, and they were incredibly photogenic. They rarely took a bad picture. And they didn't need much sleep. It was like 4 people who were perfectly programmed for how it turned out.
Yeah. Well, it helps being in your 20s. I think I had more energy back then, I think.
I can barely remember, but I was pretty good up until my middle 30s, and then it got difficult. Yeah. But I can remember I had a Sony clock radio by my bed. Do you remember those from the 70s?
Sure, yeah.
White cube. With big blue numbers on it. And I bought it because I liked the look of it as a clock. And I never, ever, ever listened to the radio, except I woke up on that morning and turned on the radio, the first and last time I ever did that. And I heard a Beatles tune, and I thought, oh, that's nice. And then I heard another Beatles tune directly afterwards, and I thought, oh my God, something has happened, because they never do that.
Yeah.
And I was working in television at the time, so I just called in and heard the news and went straight to work, because it was just, mayhem that day because, you know, our station was in the northwest of England where Liverpool is. And so we felt sort of responsible for leading the coverage. But I'm not in the least bit superstitious or spiritual or anything, but why did I turn on that radio? The only time in my life that morning. Such a weird thing.
Yeah, psychic energy was in the air.
Yeah, something like that, something weird.
Yeah.
But as you say, Chapman himself was he comes across in the book as a mystery. I mean, we do not.
We
may never know. We may never understand what that was all about.
Well, I think he's starting now. Apparently, you know, recently he'll just say, "Look, I was an egomaniac, and I just wanted to be famous, and it was a terrible thing to do." You know, so. I don't know. I guess they could let him out. I don't know if they will. I know Yoko's been fighting that for a while. Don't let him out. But
yeah, I say that. I guess don't let him out. I mean, it was such an end to a chapter of all our lives. I think that's what it was. Everybody felt invested, and so it affected everybody more or less equally.
Yeah. No, and I just felt, I don't know, I wanted to tell a story a little differently. And even, you know, we're starting to get interest out in Hollywood. We'll say, I don't think anything really has been done that gets at him. I don't, you know, I don't know. It's so far, I haven't really loved any of the movies about him.
No, it's very difficult. And I would, from my perspective, being British, growing up in a similar way, I really identify with those early years. You know, Aunt Mimi, who could have been my mother, actually. She was so proper and so correct and so sniffy about the idea of playing the guitar and all of that kind of thing. That was so English. That was what they all were escaping from. And in my own way, I felt the same thing. I was trying to escape from the same grayness. And it meant so much to us that the Beatles did it because it proved it was possible. You know, maybe there was hope for us. And I love, there's a little story, you mentioned it in the book, where they, just before the Ed Sullivan date and the beginning of Beatlemania in the US, they play in Paris. And they're at the Olympia and staying at the Georges V. And I read all those early books and magazines and biographies and stuff. And there's a story that they're up in the room after the show and the phone rings and it's a transatlantic call from New York, which at the time was just, you know, impossibly romantic that could happen. And Brian Epstein listens and puts the phone down and he says, "Boys, you're #1 in America." And I read that line and it was just a huge thing for me. It became my ambition. And then, you know, what would it be, 40 years later or something like that? I got the same call from my publisher. I was on tour in Chicago and I got that call, "You're #1 in America." It felt wonderful. It really did.
Yeah. You know, it's similar here in the States in terms of different kind of rock and roll, at least in the beginning, to Chuck Berry and Elvis and all that stuff. But similarly, you know, in terms of that very bland kind of Ozzy and Harriet thing that we were growing up with, and here was, you know, rock and roll and some of the, you know, the James Dean movies and whatever, where we saw, okay, you know, that's where we want to be. We don't want it. You never want it. You whatever your parents have, you don't want it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want Ozzy and Harriet.
And the parents were so disapproving in a way that I found actually intellectually very interesting. They hated it. And in Britain, they had a phrase. They would see something going on, long hair or rock and roll or whatever. And they would say, "We didn't fight the war for this." And actually, yes, they did. They fought for freedom. And this is what freedom looks like.
Same thing here, right? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
We're similar.
We're very lucky that we were in a generation that really had, I mean, in the US, obviously there was Vietnam looming over everybody, which we did not have in Britain. But other than that, this was the first free generation ever, really, free of economic problems, free of.
Well, the Vietnam thing, that was really, it's interesting since then. I mean, we really, very few people go in the military now. Here, And in those days, it was, you know, I mean, you were going to get drafted. I came out of school right when they had that lottery.
Uh-huh.
And I got it was one of the weirdest nights of my life. I was in school and I went out with 4 or 5 of the other guys, and they broadcast it on television. And here was, you know, January 1st, I forget the number, blah, 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 blah. And then it came to and you get either cheers or moans in the bar, depending on whether you got, because they said it would probably only go up to 60 in terms of who would get, you know, drafted. And I got like a 265 or something like that. And I was going, all right,
Yeah,
this is good.
I'm just old enough. I would have had a number, but it would never have been called because it was all winding down by the time I turned.
Yeah.
So anyway, so The Last Days of John Lennon, I loved it. I thought it was, and I love the pace and the thriller aspect. You can really feel it coming. And so I totally recommend that, especially as you pointed out, for people who don't know about the Beatles.
Yeah.
You know, as well as an exciting story, that is the history of the Beatles, which is something that people may not appreciate now, but it was so revolutionary at the time.
Oh yeah, no, it's an unbelievable story. I mean, it's kind of, it's hard to match it or find any. I mean, Elvis' story is kind of interesting. Another one like Rags to Riches, although, you know, I don't know how interesting he was as a person either. You know, I mean, one of the little stories in the book is, you know, when they meet Elvis, and he's one of their heroes, and they're you know, really disappointed. You know, and then they meet Dylan, which is a funny little thing because they smoke weed with him, and he's shocked that because that's the first time they ever experienced it. He couldn't believe that, you know, like, how can you be like rock musicians? And, you know, so.
Yeah, it was, all right. So book number 2 for
yes, Deadly Cross. He's back.
All right. Deadly Cross, which is, well, I mean, let's talk about Alex Cross. When did you first conceive of the particular background for the guy? Because that is so.
Well, I grew up in a town that was, there was a lot of black and white. It was a real mix, different kind of a world, upstate New York. And my grandparents had a small restaurant and bar, and the cook there was a black woman, and she was great. And at some point she was having problems with her family, with her husband in particular. And she moved in with us. And during that period, when I was a little kid, I spent a lot of time with her family, and they were bright and they were funny, and the music was great and the cooking was great. And that's where I got a sense, not that the Cross family is based on them, but that was the, you know, plus the way I grew up. A lot of basketball. I played a lot of basketball as a kid, you know, mostly with black kids. And, you know, so that was kind of the background that got me interested in it. And style-wise, it's an interesting thing because I had not had I was lucky and weird. My first book I turned down by 31 publishers. It then won an Edgar as Best First Mystery, so go figure. But I didn't have anything that sold. And then, you know, with Cross, I said, well, okay, I'm going to really try to write something that you can't put down. I'm going to attempt to do that. I don't know if I can, but I'll try to do that. And I wrote this really long outline, like 320 pages or something. And I read it through and I went, this is the book. It wasn't exactly, but it was very close to the book. And that's when I got into the short chapters and the very, you know, I like that just every chapter is a scene. And it reminded somebody of Bruce Springsteen when he did that in Nebraska. He did the same thing. He put it down on a, you know, and it was just very simple. And he listened to it for several months. And at one point he went, this is it. This is Nebraska, you know. Anyway, but that's where my style came from that. And it's, you know, it's unusual. It's very bare boned and it's colloquial. It's the way we tell stories to one another verbally, usually. You know, we don't, you know, somebody said you can be very successful if your stories or your chapters have a beginning and an end, you know, and then you're a grand master if you actually can write a middle. So, yeah, the writers can. If you got a beginning and an end, you'll be okay. You get a medal, then you'll get a Pulitzer or something.
But we have to go over that again, because that sounds like it was a chance discovery of the style rather than extreme.
It was. It was.
I mean, that is a hell of a lucky chance discovery, because really.
Well, the whole thing is lucky. I mean, you go and, I grew up, my father grew up in a Newburyport house. It was called the Pogie. His mother was she was a charwoman there, essentially. She could clean the kitchen stuff. I mean, my background is very I don't know how we go from there to here.
Right.
So that's, whatever the hell, something happened.
But if you reverse engineer it, or if people look back on it, it is as if it is a very deliberate choice that is very accommodating of reality, not only in terms of people's reading preferences, but also their reading opportunities, because that is something that has changed vastly.
Yeah.
We were younger, when reading was a purposeful serial activity. You would sit and read for 4 or 5 hours. And that doesn't happen anymore. You're lucky if you get 20 minutes on the subway to work, 20 minutes at lunchtime, 15 minutes before you go to bed. And so it looks, in retrospect, like you knew that, thought about that, and then engineered.
I might have thought about it a bit. I'm not sure. I think you're probably, I definitely thought about it eventually. And felt that it was right for reading habits and whatever, which are probably changing a little bit now. People have more time. There's no movies, so they might be willing to, and I think they are, to deal with stuff that's a little thicker and denser. And, we'll see. They're reading more a bit.
And the short chapter thing is very gratifying, because it gives the reader a sense of progress. What I've found.
Yeah.
With my readers is that, I mean, obviously there's a huge mosaic of different types of reader, but right on the margins are the people that are really not skillful readers at all. And if they feel that the author is helping them, one of the compliments that I've had, which is the most heartfelt, but also one of the strangest, is where you meet somebody who said, I loved your book, I finished it.
Yeah. Or you got my husband reading again, or I hadn't been reading for 15 years, or you get that all the time. Which I like that a lot. It's a great compliment.
I had to go to London,
even though it's an insult. It's good though.
I mean, to me, it's impossible to insult me about anything to do with style or appeal or anything like that, because I agree.
But I like to undercut and joke. So
right. There's me and there's the reader, and there's nobody else. And it's the reader's opinion I care about, and the same with you. And I once was on a plane, and I was sitting next to a guy reading your book, and I glanced down, and he was finishing chapter 3, starting chapter 4. And I ate my sandwich or whatever. I glanced down again. He was on chapter 39.
Yeah.
And I thought, that guy, I mean, the words, you could have organized the words into long, long chapters. So he's actually not making any more progress than he would have anyway. But he feels like he is. And he feels the excitement and the pace simply because of that.
Well, it goes back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, Lee. If you can write the beginning and the end, you'll get through. If you do it, see, I don't even put the middle in there.
Yeah. Well, I got to that point a few books ago. I thought, because the middle is always such a slog. I thought, well, let's just miss out the middle. Let's go straight from the beginning to the end. And it's
I just try to stick with the scene. If the background stuff, if it doesn't fit in that scene somehow, it's not coming in the book.
Right.
My book.
So as far as, because this has been running decades now, Alex Cross, and what is the appeal? I mean, generically,
Search me.
It's the attractive character. Do you feel that
people bond with it? I mean, look, he's clearly, he has these difficult cases. I mean, the thing in Deadly Cross, it's insanity. I mean, there's, in TV, they talk about the A story and the B story. I do like the A, B, C, D, and E and F story. I don't care. If it works for me, it works, whatever. But, so he has these complex stories, which are interesting, if nothing else. I don't know. And I don't write realism. So every once in a while, somebody will say, well, that's not very realistic. And I go, I don't do realism. So you can say I don't like it. That's fair, but I don't do realism. But I think there's the not putting it down. There are the short chapters, so it is rewarding for people. And look, he's a good guy. He's a family guy. He's pretty moral. He's a little larger than life for sure. That's okay. That's okay. Not everybody. I don't. Some of my characters are a little bit more flawed. Reacher's larger than life. I love Reacher. Reacher's cool. But that's the thing. You have the Bond. Yeah, what's Reacher up to? I want to find out.
Yeah, it's and the moral thing. People love that about both characters, Reacher and Cross, that they've got a good heart and they will do what a person should do. Which I think, again, readers find very rewarding, because in real life, I'm sure that most people are decent folk and would like to do the correct thing. But of course they can't because of numerous circumstances. So they're frustrated and miserable at some liberal level. They're a bit just annoyed with life. Nothing ever gets sorted out. And so they love it when they see a character who takes the story from A to Z and does the right thing every step of the way and fixes it. That is a huge...
Well, that's one of the things now. I think people are so frustrated because so many things they're not fixable, or you don't get that relief it just keeps, like, I don't want to get political, but like this election, I mean, give me a break. I mean, we can't just drag this, but we are, here it is. And it's like a bad novel. It just keeps going on and on and on. You go, wait a minute, no, it's ended. No, it hasn't ended. What do you mean it hasn't ended? It's ended. I mean, just, whatever. We have to be careful what we're doing here, but,
Yeah, I mean, because like Michael Jordan said, everybody buys sneakers, not just.
Yeah. I'm all for everybody. I mean, be reason. The Republican, Democrats. Look, I mean, honestly, it's about you choose big government or small government. You have to make the other person a devil. Some people believe in big government. Some people believe in small. That's all somewhat valid. And then we compromise. But now everybody, compromise, how dare we compromise? Well, because that's what we do in life.
Shoehorning in here a look ahead. You mentioned it before.
I'm like Lennon. I want to get into the big stuff,
Yeah, right. Well, you were just talking about the sequel to The President is Missing.
Yeah.
With Clinton. So tell us a bit more about that. I mean, because the first one was a blast. I just thought it was wonderful.
I think this, this, Lee, you start and you never know. You hope that they're going to turn out. I'm sure, as you did your last one with your brother, you go like, well, let's see how this is going to work. You don't know. So the first one, that was good. And I really enjoy The President. We've gotten to be friendly. He sends me Christmas presents. He sent me a cigar box, what do you call the cigar boxes, whatever? Humidor, and for last Christmas. And I call him up, I said, you're the cigar expert. So he knows I don't smoke, so I said, what do I put in here, bubble gum or chocolate? And he goes, oh, bubble gum. He said, at our age, you're going to exercise the gums and everything, But the new one, it's a president's daughter. It's not the same president. It's different president, and he gets out of office, and his daughter gets kidnapped, and which you go, okay, well, that sounds sort of interesting, but it gets a lot more interesting when you get the expertise of here's what would really happen. Here's, literally this in terms of the Secret Service, in terms of cooperation with the current president, in terms of, whatever. And that's, I think, what made the first book, particularly the authenticity of it. and then this one. No, if this happened, as crazy as it sounds, here's how that could play out.
Right.
So,
And of course, what everybody wants to know is what is he like as a writer in terms of, you know, the actual day-to-day production?
He's well, I wouldn't say he's the most prolific, but when you got to sort of pin him down. But he's a really good writer. It's just, you know, it's like his 1,000-page book. I mean, I think it took, and then all of a sudden, in about 3 months, he went, "I got to write this damn thing." And then he's a very good writer. Good. He's very thoughtful, good stylist. He sent me as a present at one point a book of his eulogies. They're great. They're great. I mean, if I ever die, and I hope I don't, but I'd like him to do a eulogy for me. They're very good. They're fun. They're interesting. They're, you know, whatever. And usually they're, you know, not so good. It's funny. This is a weird. One of my best friends died, and went to the funeral, and the priest that, and he knew my friend really well, as opposed to, you know, he was an honor roll man, that kind of bullshit, Bible quote. But he really knew him well, and a Catholic, you know, and they're big on the afterlife. And the priest tells a story. He said, "I went up to see Steve at Dana-Farber, and, you know, it's near the end, and he said, Steve's in the bed, and he sees the priest at the door. He sees me in the door with the priest, and he points a finger, and he goes, 'You better be right,'" which was a great, you know, Catholic, Catholic parishioner to the priest line. So anyway, but no, he's Clinton. He's a good writer. Good writer.
All right. Well, if anything unfortunate happens, I'll pass on that message that he is from your eulogy.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's check in with Patrick whether we have any questions yet.
Not a one.
I am here. Hey guys, by the way, I was just going to mention, just for fun, that my mother saw the Beatles on a blind date in 1966 at Dodger Stadium. It was pretty cool. It was, I think, the concert right before their last show at Candlestick Park.
Now, see, but you got to say, and she married the guy, and they had me that night.
I was conceived.
Sometimes you just add a little extra to the story, and, you know,
that'll surprise.
That's good. All right.
That'll surprise my father, but I think I like that. I think I'll go with that. Actually, I have a question for you, Mr. Patterson, which is regarding and also for you, Lee, about New York at that particular moment in time in 1980. I think that December 10th, isn't that the 40-year anniversary? New York
right was, yeah.
And you know,
and he turned 80 a couple months ago. Yeah, or he would have.
Right.
He didn't, but he would have.
And it strikes me that New York was in a very, very dark time at that moment. You know, heroin and everything that was kind of going on in the streets. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't frickin' remember.
Well,
a dark time. There was more violence. It was one of the, which they seemed to straighten out a little better a little after that. But I don't remember exactly, like 1980. Let's see. I don't know. I have no idea. Do you remember, Lee?
I think in general it's very exaggerated by people that don't live there, to be honest. I mean,
is that right?
I first went to New York in 1974, and that was about its lowest point. The South Bronx was on fire every night. It was
that's a story. Yeah,
all of that kind of stuff. And in the book, actually, you point out that a lot of people were not all that surprised by the gunshots because they would hear them from time to time. So yeah, it was not like it is. It wasn't Disneyfied like it is today.
But you mentioned the thing about, I went to undergraduate in the city, and I remember calling up one of my friends. Come on down and visit, and he goes, "Oh, it's too dangerous." I go, "Dude, you went to college there. Stop looking at the television. It's you'll be fine."
I did a radio show once about New York crime novels, and the guy said, "Is this from personal experience?" I said, "No, I've walked all over New York from the 70s onwards, and I never had a moment's problem anywhere ever."
You know, and Clinton's place is on 125th. That's where his office is,
Yeah,
which is right in the middle of Harlem.
I was up and down 9th Avenue and all that kind of stuff, and I had never had a moment's problem. But the DJ said, yeah, but you're 6'4" and look like an axe murderer. So maybe it's different for other people. I don't know. But I think it's generally speaking exaggerated. I think New York in 1980 was not, you know, it was certainly not.
I was in a bar once that got held up. That was the extent of it. It was like 4 young kids, and you could tell that they knew what they were doing. So I wasn't even as afraid as I should have been, given that they were all armed. But you know, they basically took everybody's money, and they were out of there in about 2 minutes. Yeah, but that was the only time I ever really saw any violence or any, you know, real in all the years I was there.
I've put the question to the Facebook audience about what's your favorite Beatles album? And I'm getting some interesting responses. I'm going with Revolver. And how about you guys?
I'm Sgt. Pepper's. I'm sorry.
Sgt. Pepper?
Yeah. Whatever that album, yeah.
I mean, certainly that was just a wonderfully great album. But the first album, Please Please Me, I thought, for a time capsule, you know, it was recorded in 10 or 12 hours, depending on who you believe. The whole album in one session, basically, with a break for dinner. And you can hear that. You can hear 3,000 Hamburg performances in that first album. So I would kind of bookend it. Yeah, I would go with the first album and then Sgt. Pepper's. Yeah,
Sgt. Pepper.
But even like the weird thing about like you start like I think Blackbird was a Lennon song, but 2 of my favorite, Blackbird and I Am the Walrus. I was in a bar. That song for whatever, I don't know what state I was in, but whatever it was, I played it 5 times in a row in a jukebox. And when they realized I was the one playing it over and over again, they threw me out of the bar. So, cuckoo, cuckoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, some more questions from the audience. Here's a question for both of you, which is, can you fall out of love with your main character? Or have you had that happen before when you're writing these long-running series?
I haven't. I mean, there's still stuff to me I don't know about Alex. I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, I don't know. Things have changed for him too. You know, he's got, you know, Bree is going off into different arenas now. So I'm still interested in him.
My answer to that is it's very important in the first place not to fall in love with the character. You got to have a certain amount of critical distance between yourself and the character. And it's been a feature of my life as a reader is reading long series and then seeing the point at which the author falls in love with the character. And that ruins the series generally. So I think that what you got to do with a long-running character is keep them at arm's length, be super critical of them, and be prepared to put the warts and all in, because that's what keeps them honest and authentic. So, and I would say that is why Alex Cross has endured as long as he has. I don't think you are in love with him. I think that you can't fall out of love with him.
The way I interpreted it was, do you want to keep writing about him?
Right. Yeah. Well, for me,
because we know love has a lot of warts. That's part of the, we're married.
True. And I mean, I still want to write about Reacher, but I
still want to be with my wife. I mean, you know.
Oh, well, that's nice to know. Yeah. Is she listening?
So she'll hear about this.
Oh, Patrick, may I ask a question? I've been wanting to ask Jim. In order to stay interested in Alex, it's great to have him do new things. And I was very taken with his, you open this book where he's out with his kids and they want to do rock climbing, and he's not entirely confident or even sure that he wants to do this. Did you, is that something you've done? Did you put it in there to give him something different to do?
Because I have no interest in rock climbing, so I was right with Alex on it. One of the things that happens in this book is somebody does die who people won't expect. So there's a little, whatever out for the world, so you can figure that one out.
I have plenty of people here on the audience saying we would love to see a Cross-Reacher collaboration. Is that something that could ever happen?
Is Reacher with Paramount?
He is actually, yeah.
Well, actually, it could happen then, because Paramount has this thing. They got stung by Tom Clancy early on. I don't mean that Tom is a bad guy, and then so they own Cross. I mean, they haven't been unpleasant about it. So with Reacher, yeah, we could probably do that.
And
Paramount would be the. Oh, I mean, it's a movie. Yeah. Oh, you mean there's a book? Yeah.
I think that's what they were saying, but.
All right. Okay.
I mean, it might be harder for my end, but with Jim's productivity, you see what people maybe don't know outside the business is actually, I mean, obviously James Patterson is a gigantic world dominating author, but he's actually the nicest guy and will always help you out and will always give you help or advice if you want. So that's the background to this joke that the other writers tell about Patterson, which is this, that you need some help or advice. So you call him up and his assistant answers and you say, I'd like to speak to Mr. Patterson, please. And she says, I'm sorry, right now he's writing a novel. And so you say, that's okay, I'll hold.
Well, I've got to say something real quick.
We could fit it in,
yeah. I just wanted to say something really quick. A number of years ago here in Phoenix, Barbara and I were affiliated with this big charity luncheon for the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. And, each year we'd go bigger and bigger with who we'd try to get. And the people at the organization kept saying, can we get James Patterson? I'm like, yeah, right. Come on. And, but I said, what the hell? I'll ask. Well, a lot of the writers consider it peer support, but I asked, and Mr. Patterson came out on his own nickel and did this event, wonderful event for this, great charity. And that, I was so impressed by that. And thank you, even though it's a number of years after the fact.
No, I know. You're welcome. I wish I could go somewhere now.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions just briefly about, can you talk, Lee and Jim, about your writing process?
Lee?
Well, mine is always happens late in the day. When I was in television before, working whatever needed doing, so sometimes evenings, nights, whatever. So when I became a writer, I promised myself I would never do anything in the morning. And that is one of my firmly held beliefs. Nothing of value ever is achieved in the morning. So typically I'll start after lunch, and I literally have no plan, no outline, no idea of where it's going. I just want to discover the story along with the reader. And I sit down to write with that exact same feeling. Wow, I wonder what happens next. I have no clue. And it just happens on the page, and I'm as excited as a reader. So my method is inadvisable, I would say, for most people, but it worked for me.
Couldn't be more different. I'm an addict. My name is James Patterson. I write 7 days a week. I love to write in the morning, and I work from an outline, although I'm not a slave to the outline. I'll do it, and then, and it never winds up where I think it's going to end up. So, the endings, I write an ending in the outline, but I almost never wind up there. Something happens along the way. So I get surprised as well, but I'm a little bit more different approach. But his books are better, so maybe I'll go to that. Fuck the outline.
A question about your true crime work. I recently read and saw the TV version of the Epstein story, which was pretty incredible, and also the athlete whose name escapes me with the concussion.
Hernandez.
Yeah, fascinating case. Are there other cases that you're considering writing about, true stories?
Yeah, and maybe this, something in the area of this guy that was running, what is it, Zappos? Maybe something there. We'll see. I don't know. I haven't really thought. It was another nonfiction today, which I'm just looking at and go, I'm not going to do it. So I don't know what the next nonfiction. Well, I tell you, I do know what the next nonfiction is, which I love. I think, Lee, you might find this one interesting too. It's called Walk in My Combat Boots. And it's coming out in February. And a friend of mine down here, Matt Eversman, he was in Black Hawk Down. He was the actual sergeant in the thing. And a lot of people, including my father, when they come back from the wars, they don't want to talk about it at all, to civilians especially. And I watched Matt do some interviews, and because he's military, people would talk to him. So I said, Matt, we're going to do a couple hundred interviews. So what happened was he did the interviews, and then I turned these 30 or 40 pages into like 6 or 7 page stories. And they'll blow your mind. Our mission was, if you were there, you'll say, these guys got it right. And if you're one of these people that bullshits about that, I know what you'd say, I had it all wrong. And the blurbs we've gotten are just, sometimes they write them and you go, somebody's just being nice, but they're just like Clinton. I didn't want a blurb from him, but I gave it to him and he sent one and he said, I can't stop thinking about this book because it's just so emotional and you don't hear these stories. I don't, at any rate, but and I like it so much that I'm doing one now on nurses. Same basic thing, interviews, and then turning them into these 6 or 7 page stories. And they're just, it's the nurses is more intense than the combat. It's unbelievable. And not just because of COVID, pre-COVID, what these people go through, how they do it, they're addicts. I mean, in the best possible way, but they're amazing stories.
I have a couple of questions regarding kind of the collaborations that you've done, James.
Yeah,
Can you
somebody
talk a
wants
little
to collaborate.
Yeah, several people do, but you've worked with some amazing writers. Can you talk about how that process works at all?
It really varies. Obviously, with President Clinton, it was a lot different than Kwame Alexander on the Cassius Clay, or Muhammad Ali Cassius Clay thing. That was very different. It varies with some of the people that I write with. It depends on strengths and weaknesses. I almost always write a long outline. I will rewrite. And it really it just depends on who I'm working with, and it depends on what their strengths are. A couple of them are really good stylists. It's fascinating. You don't find imagination and logic in the same bodies. I think with Lee and I, it is sort of in the same body, but a lot of them, even journalists, that's why you have some people who will sit there who are reporters, and then sometimes the stuff goes back and somebody has to rewrite it because the reporters are out there and they're digging and they're imaginative and whatever. And there's one writer in particular, I won't get into who he is, but he's a really, really good stylist, but he just doesn't have no imagination at all.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Andrew Gross and Michael Ledwidge and Candace Fox and who else? Barbara Sullivan. You've written
Barbara Sullivan.
Got a number of books with Marshall Karp, and trying to remember.
Barbara
really
Sullivan.
Nice guy from Montana whose name is going right out of my head, but he had a huge bestseller.
Mark Sullivan.
Yes, thank you.
Mark Sullivan. Yeah.
Sullivan.
I liked Mark's books a lot. Mark Sullivan. And do you find, because we're used to Clive Cussler and his process, Jim, because we were his bookstore up until he died in February. Do you find that you're doing an editorial role in some cases more than you are doing a writer's role?
No, because I outlined the damn things. One of my agents said I could write this goddamn book. The outlines are good. Yeah, that's a big part of it. What's the story? There's 2 elements. What's the story? Does the story move? If you think you can do it, go do it. You make yourself a lot of money if you can write those stories. And the other part of it is style. And my style, my general style, my own style is very colloquial. It's kind of the way we tell stories to one another. That's my deal. If everybody wrote that way, it'd be horrifying.
a few questions about your work for younger readers.
Yeah.
And it seems like you have a lot of fun doing them, and they're yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is your approach fundamentally different, or is it just the same basic
I think
storytelling
it's the
drive.
same thing. It's having respect for the kids. I mean, with the, for whatever reason, I like to laugh and I have a pretty good sense of humor and I can write funny. But Alex started out, he just wasn't that funny. And but with the kid stuff, I can really, let it go a little bit. So the kid stuff is mostly funny. I have an imprint at Little Brand, Jimmy Books, and the mission is when a kid finishes a Jimmy book, they'll say, please give me another book, as opposed to a lot, millions of kids in this country have never read a book that they liked. That's a disaster. And it's a disaster in schools if they keep giving them books that they don't like. That does not work. Doesn't work. And that's why so many kids go, I don't like to read. Give them, there are a lot of books that are really good to read and they're good for you. And that's what they need to do, more of those in schools. And you won't have as many kids who, half the kids in this country do not read at grade level. Oh, more than half. And it doesn't have to be that way. I'm working with the University of Florida. They've been testing a program for 6 years. They have it up into the mid 80s. Over 80% of the kids reading above grade level. So, and it's like, we got the vaccine. Now we just have to have some states go, okay, we're going to use the vaccine. We have it. We have the vaccine. We can fix it. And that will save lives. And ultimately, if you just want to be economic, like a lot of these states, it's going to pay off big time. If you have kids, they can read, they can finish high school, they can maybe get decent jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big deal.
Barbara?
I wanted to ask Lee a question because, we've been talking about Jack Reacher and his full-scale thrillers, but you write a lot of short fiction, and maybe you'll even write more of it now that you're not writing the longer books. So now, how is that a different process, Lee, and how is it different?
I'm not sure that I'm any good at the short fiction. I mean, I have this strange mental thing in my head because people ask you to do a short story for an anthology or something like that. Very often in support of an organization or some kind of charitable dimension to it. So of course, I'm totally happy to do it. But I have this strange mental block that I think because this is not one of my mainstream contracted novels, then therefore nobody's ever going to see this. So it makes me very free to do whatever I want. But I don't think I've ever really learned the trick of writing a short story. Short story is a very particular thing with a certain structure and a certain mechanism, a spring in the middle of it that then pays off at the end very briefly and succinctly. And I'm not sure that I've ever really mastered that. My short stories are actually incredibly short novels in terms of their structure. And so I'm real happy to do it if it helps somebody, if it sells another book or for a good cause. I'm really happy to do it, but I suggest that nobody ever studies my short stories as a clue to how to do them.
Didn't you say once, I was going to say, Lee, didn't you say once that your short stories, you try to focus on something that happened to you that day?
Yeah, I mean, they're always, I have one rule with the short story, which is I'll always do it the night before deadline. And whatever I did that day shows up. It's inevitable.
Any other questions there, Patrick?
Let's see here. Well, I actually like this. This is for Lee. And it's, how would you feel about a parody of Jack Reacher?
I
think you would like it. That's what I thought.
If you produce something that is durable and strong work, of course it can withstand all kinds of parodies. And there have been actually. There's a magazine in Britain called Private Eye, and they always do a parodied version of my books. And The Guardian, they call it condensed reads. It's maybe the whole novel in 500 words is a kind of parody. Bring it on is what I say. If you're confident about your work, you're never defensive about it. It will stand up.
Oh, well, we're talking about other forms. Do either of you have any thoughts about writing screenplays?
Me?
Oh, either one of you.
I love writing screenplays because it's lucrative, it's easy money, it's quick. it's a slightly different channel, and so you're exercising different muscles. I love writing the screenplay. What I then hate is all the stuff that comes after, the story conferences that are just designed to drive
That's
you.
why I have no interest in it for that reason. It's painful. I don't even like to, even other people's screenplays, I hate to listen to these people tear these things apart and all. It's just crazy. We're actually doing something now on one of the projects, and the whole thing with this producer is he goes out and he's a really top producer. He commissions a screenplay because he ran a studio. He said, the last thing I want to do is get involved in any of that stuff. He commissions a screenplay, he attaches a star, attaches a director, then he takes the package out. I like that. No 1,000, stings and bites and whatever. It's just, I don't like that process.
I don't either. I call it getting nibbled to death by goldfish, and it is just infuriating. And so, yeah, the actual writing is great. The talking about it afterward, and I wondered for the longest time. I wondered why, and the real reason is you're at this table with a bunch of executives who have no talent at all in terms of producing and of actually creating the product, but they want. They're looking ahead to that moment where we come out of the movie house and you stand on the sidewalk, you light a cigarette and you say to your partner, I love that part where whatever. And they want that part to be their idea. And the only way they can guarantee that is if they have every idea. So it's just this constant barrage of bullshit so that later they can claim, yeah, that was my idea.
Yeah. It's to me, it's like if that conference table was a metaphor for the whole process, and they will sit there and go like, the tablecloth is wrong, the legs on the table are wrong, we need more diversity in the room, new ceiling fan, blah blah blah. And the real problem is that in 10 seconds, a plane is going to come through here and kill everybody in the room. They don't know about that. They don't know the real problem. And they're sitting there doing all this table dressing stuff and driving everybody crazy. I have no interest in it, nor would I want to write something that when I knew that that's what I was going to have to, it's, gives me the shivers.
We were talking about parodies a moment ago, and you can't parody it. I've been in meetings where they say, maybe he could have a dog. Maybe the dog's got 3 legs. Maybe the dog's got cancer. It's endless. And you've written a scene that's a really great scene, and it's got this white helicopter that's about to take off and deliver the bomb or whatever. And they say, that white helicopter, but it'd be black. And I'm like, yes, it could be whatever you want. Let me out of here.
Yeah. Well, and almost as bad is they bring in some writer to do your thing, and you don't like anything that they've done. You just go like, some you go like, oh, I love everything that they've done, but more than likely, I don't like any of their work. I mean, that's just my, and then they give you their take. Well, I think Jack Reacher ought to be short. What? Why? I mean, it just, or War and Peace. We're doing it as an opera. Oh, okay, that's different. Whatever. And they always, the take is always something like, we go like, okay, why would you do that? That's baffling.
All these responses, I was actually asking Lee about short stories and screenplays, because for 25 years we've had a running battle where I've said to him, writers never retire. Lee said, no, by God, I'm going to. And so I still stick with writers don't retire. Retiring from Reacher is not the same thing as retiring from writing.
Well, let's talk about
I keep needling you along here because I want to hear that you're doing something.
Robert, we'll have dinner 5 years from now, and you can list everything I've done since this moment, and it will be blank, believe me.
Yeah, you know what you turn into is an absolute, you always were, but you're a fabulous MC, and I'm so glad that you were free to talk to Jim about John Lennon.
You are a fabulous MC, and that's hard. That's hard.
It's a calling. It really is. So I want
because we're used to being interviewed, not being the people that
exactly. But
ask a question and get out of the way.
It was an easy ask for me because I got huge affection and respect for Jim Patterson. In this genre, totally groundbreaking, and I always think you got to look at the beginning. And that Edgar Winter, the Berryman book, I mean, that was a hell of a book. None of this happens without storytelling ability. And that is what I admire. So it was very, very easy to say yes. And I'm glad we did it. I'm just so sorry we didn't do it in person.
Well,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
am
me
I,
too.
because we would have
Yeah.
had a spectacular.
I'd love to go out to
after.
dinner right now.
Yeah. Jim, it was wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see
now
you.
Now that we have Zoom and travel is not, although we'd like it to be, perhaps we can see you more often. But in any case, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
I know we're going to do a big deal with combat boots, Matt and I. So we'll that's a cool one, and it's a noble effort, I think.
Wonderful.
So
Well,
maybe we'll
whatever you guys are up to, we're
and Matt's
right
interesting, unlike me. He's like a cool guy.
Terrific. Let me thank all of you who are watching this. I want to wish you a very happy holiday, happy Hanukkah coming up on Thursday, Merry Christmas, all those good things. Patrick, thanks for your excellent tech work once again.
Thank you, Patrick.
And good night, everybody.
Lee, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.